Hey, whoa, whoa. Are you a cop? I'm Private Investigator Stop Sign 49. Sorry, but I'm not taking any jobs right now. See, I'm in the middle of one of my biggest operations yet. You want to see it? Are you sure you're not a cop? Alright, take a look. This is a hit list. A Shoujo hit list. After last year, I decided I wanted to knock more of these series out, so for 2022, I made this hit list of Shoujo series to watch. You want to know how it's been going? Alright, sit down. It's gonna be a long night. This is the final version of my Shoujo hit list. The list is mostly ordered based on priority, but I also threw some things I had lesser expectations for in randomly, so that way the list wasn't front-loaded with all the good stuff. I picked shows that are huge and popular and influential, but also ones that are more obscure to see if I could find some hidden gems. There's also some shows on here that are technically shoujo, but also cross into other genres, stuff like Penguindrum and Banana Fish and Sabage-bu, just some things to spice up the list. I also really wanted to rewatch all of Sailor Moon this year, so I spread the original 5 seasons out across the list. I still never really want to watch Sailor Moon Crystal. I just wanted to rewatch the original because I haven't seen it since high school, and yet it's still in my top 10, so I wanted to assess whether or not it belongs there. I also wanted to watch the Sailor Moon movies, which I had never seen before. So with all that, let's take a look at my first target, Kaleido Star. This honestly wasn't my top priority. It was only the first thing on the list because I had already started it towards the end of 2021. This was a recommendation from a friend who got it as a recommendation from their friend. My friend hadn't actually seen it, but was interested in it because it was directed by Junichi Sato. Now, Sato is a pretty huge name in the shoujo scene. He directed things like Goldfish Warning, Season 1 of Sailor Moon, Doremi, Princess Tutu, and some other non-shoujo things like Aria and Sergeant Frog. Now, I like Sailor Moon and Aria, and I've been interested in Goldfish Warning for a while, but I couldn't really get through Sergeant Frog. I don't really have any interest in Doremi, and I did not like Princess Tutu, so I'm pretty mixed on the guy. But Kaleido Star has an interesting enough premise focusing on a setting that rarely ever gets to be the star of a show. The circus. Now, I went to the circus once as a kid, and it was pretty fucking lame. I liked the thing where the motorcycles drive around in the cage, but the rest of that day is a total blur. All I remember is the ringmaster singing. Like, a lot. So, yeah. Don't really have a strong affinity for the circus, but it's an interesting setting, especially because this show is more focused on a Cirque du Soleil sort of thing. This girl, Sora, travels from Japan to America to audition for the Kaleido stage, which is this big acrobatic circus where they put on these elaborate shows based on fairy tales and stuff. Her parents took her as a kid, and she's been obsessed ever since. It's been her dream to perform on the Kaleido stage with her idol and the group's biggest star, Layla. Right away, though, she basically starts getting aimed for the ace. The boss is really tough on her, but always picks her because he sees her potential. She gets bullied by her peers for what they think is the boss's bias towards her, and Layla is just kind of a bitch for no reason, as far as I can tell. Like, damn, at least the blonde idol in Aim for the Ace was cool. However, something that was not lifted from Aim for the Ace is Sora's supernatural guide, the Fool. He's the spirit who shows up to anyone who's destined to do great things on the stage, becoming a true Kaleido Star, hey. He basically is just there to give Sora advice and tarot readings that she ignores, even though he's always right. Oh, and he's also a pervert, which is a very necessary and very funny joke. Alright, first off, let's get this out of the way. Goddamn, this show is ugly. It's by the studio Gonzo, who have made shows like Welcome to the NHK, Hellsing, Rosario the Vampire, Special A, Full Metal Panic, Speed Grapher, all of which are very ugly shows. But I quite like NHK and Speed Grapher, so even though their shows are hideous, they do make some good ones. Is Kaleido Star one of them? Yeah, so I didn't finish Kaleido Star. Look, I really didn't want to drop the very first thing on the list, but this show is not good. The biggest issue is just how repetitive it is. I watched 10 episodes, which is roughly 20% of the series. Let me break down the formula for almost every episode I watched. Sora is chosen for some new job at the Kaleido stage. She's really hyped about it. The fool does a tarot reading that tells her she's gonna suck at it. She ignores him, then she sucks at it. Layla belittles her, the boss threatens to fire her unless she can get her act together in a ridiculously short amount of time. Her friends try to stand up for her, but she tells them it's okay. She enters a rigorous, almost self-destructive training schedule over the next few days. The fool tries to peep on her in the bath, and it's even funnier this time. She gets a second chance and does great this time. Layla and the boss are quietly impressed, and she gets promoted. It's a pretty boring formula, mostly because of that last part there. Sora always gets a second chance, and she always succeeds. The boss is constantly disappointed with her until she nearly kills herself just to do the bare minimum of what he was expecting in the first place. If I were the boss, I would probably still fire her. Clearly she's not cut out for this. This just makes the stakes so low all of the time, because regardless of how bad Sora's doing and how close she gets to leaving, she's always going to pull through. I get the message about practice makes perfect, you have to keep trying to succeed, you're probably not going to succeed on your first attempt, but they could spice things up a little bit. And it's not like I'm wishing for Sora to fail. I like seeing her succeed and all and following her dreams, but again, it's just the same thing every time and it gets really old. Alright, well, to be honest, there were a few episodes that deviated from this formula. For example, there's one where instead of the boss threatening to fire Sora, her dad almost forces her to come home because he thinks she's gonna get hurt. It's not until they're at the airport, minutes before their flight departs, that she starts crying and saying how much fun this all was, and he somehow finally realizes that she wants to stay. That episode sucked. There's also one where it's about another girl going through the formula instead of Sora, and there's one where Sora takes in this baby seal and gets in trouble because they're not allowed to have pets, but then they keep him and make him a mascot. Again, even when the show deviates from the formula, the stakes are still really low. But that's nothing compared to episode 10. This is the episode that really broke me. Now this episode actually had the most interesting premise yet. Sora is finally being considered for a lead role in the stage's production of The Little Mermaid, and she has to do this dangerous stunt as part of the audition where she does a trapeze jump through a waterfall. And there's some important investor in the audience watching, so yeah, the stakes could not be higher. And sure enough, she messes up and injures herself pretty badly. So not only is she dealing with the threat of losing her job, again, seriously, how is she still hired here, but now she's developed a fear of the trapeze. She can't bring herself to attempt it again. So they get her this kind of racist martial arts trainer to enlighten her, and then she finally gets another chance, even though the stakes were ridiculously high and they were probably just gonna give the role to someone else. Like, goddamn, no wonder Layla hates her. She gets promoted every episode just for meeting the minimum expectations. Alright, anyway, this is how she manages to pull it off in her second attempt. What the fuck was that? Okay, at best, that was a very poorly timed joke that ruined a serious moment in an episode, exaggerating how she almost missed it. But at worst, she actually just pulled a fucking Wile E. Coyote move to save herself. And that's what's gonna happen from now on. The show just went from having low stakes to no stakes. I've heard that there are more fantasy elements introduced later, and it's even one of the genres on Mal, but in the first 10 episodes, the only fantasy elements were the Fool and the fact that Sora never got fired. What I'm saying is, it's mostly a pretty grounded show that probably should have established this dreamlike fantasy stuff a little earlier, because just throwing it in like this is really jarring and kind of halted any momentum the show had for me. So yeah, I just gave up. I was no longer interested in seeing how things went. Not going to give this one a rating because I didn't even get halfway through it. Let's just move on to the next target. So next up was Mawaru Penguindrum, directed by Kunihiko Ikuhara. Now Ikuhara is another pretty big name in the shoujo scene. He directed more Sailor Moon seasons, as well as the absolute classic Revolutionary Girl Utena. Utena is probably my favorite shoujo series, so I'm most likely going to be making a lot of comparisons to it, so sorry about that in advance. But let me be clear, it is not your typical shoujo. It's pretty out there, it's very surreal and abstract, and just tackles a lot of pretty heavy themes that most of these high school slice-of-life rom-coms don't. It's a pretty different beast, basically. I wanted to watch Penguindrum because of all of Ikuhara's other works, this one is kinda like the closest spiritual successor to Utena. And I also just had a lot of friends shilling it, so I had to peep. But yeah, keep in mind, this is kind of an outlier on the list. This one's pretty weird. So this show follows these two brothers, Shoma and Kanbu, and their little sister, Himari. Himari is terminally ill, and the brothers are raising her on their own. They take her to the aquarium one day, where she dies. However, she's revived by this penguin hat they got at the gift shop that seems to be possessed by some entity. And this entity makes a deal with the brothers. For reviving their sister, they must now deliver some item called the Penguindrum to this hat spirit. They don't really know where to start in the hunt for the Penguindrum, but since this show is all about fate and the way it interconnects us, they soon find themselves drawn to these different characters who all have some sort of deeper connection to their family. I can't really explain more than that because even more so than Utena, this is a full-fledged mystery. The show is meticulously written to give a perfect drip feed of information. One answer usually leads to 3 more questions. I know I saw somebody say somewhere that this is a show that punishes you for not paying attention, and I do agree, but don't feel intimidated by this. I don't think you need to take notes or watch every episode twice before moving on to the next one. You might have to pause every now and then, but yeah, I think as long as you're focused and using your head, this is not a hard show to keep up with. I ended up getting really sucked in and engaged. Like I said, I think it's pretty perfectly paced. I was just constantly looking forward to learning just a little more information, getting a few more pieces of the puzzle, only to then find out the puzzle is much larger than I anticipated. Well, okay, maybe the show's not perfectly paced. I do think the first arc is by far the weakest part of the show. It's basically centered around one character, and it's just like 1 or 2 episodes too long. It's not bad, but I can see how somebody could be turned off from the rest of the show. Like, just thinking, oh what, we're still following her? There's one episode in particular that's pretty much nothing but Rosa Versailles jokes that is easily my least favorite episode of the show. This one probably could have just been cut, and the very little important information in it could have been smushed into some other episode. But once the show gets going, it is a roller coaster. It really does have that same blend that Utena had of surreal wacky comedy, some dark intrigue and mystery, and tackling some pretty heavy themes and dramatic moments with some very intelligent and insightful writing. Kinda like with Utena, I don't feel fully confident tackling all that in this one video, and you're not here for an analysis. You're here to see if I liked the show or not, and I really liked it. It takes all of the great stuff from Utena and throws it in a more modern setting and a more trim 24 episodes as opposed to Utena's 39. In fact, while writing this script, I've come to accept a pretty hard truth, and that truth is, if it wasn't for that first arc that I was complaining about, I think I might actually like this more than Utena. Maybe. It's hard to say. I mean, the shorter runtime means that, aside from Ringo's arc at the start, we don't spend too much time with specific side characters, unlike Utena, where I think maybe Miki and Juri just had a little tiny bit too much focus. I really like all of the characters in this show. I don't think they're all good people, but they've all got really interesting stories and are well written. Sadly, we also don't really have a Nanami equivalent in Penguindrum, so we don't really get any Bizarro comic relief episodes. Closest one I can think of is the one about Natsume's grandfather, but that could be a pro or a con, depending on how you look at it. I think the one thing that Utena undeniably does better is the art. Utena is a much nicer show to look at, but I'm also pretty partial to cell animation over digital, so maybe that's just me. Either way, these are two of the best shoujo series ever made. I would recommend both of them, but I think Utena might be a better one to start with. Penguindrum honestly gets even weirder than Utena. Yeah, these shows are very special to me, and they firmly cemented Ikuhara as one of my favorite anime directors. I originally gave this a 9 out of 10, but you know what? Despite its very few flaws, the impact this show has had on me is strong enough for me to give it a 10 out of 10. I loved it. Next up was the rewatch for the first season of Sailor Moon. Like I said, I haven't watched Sailor Moon since high school, and I'm putting it to the test here to see if it belongs in my top 10. It's the only thing in my top 10 that I watched in high school. Everything else is stuff I watched in the last 3 years. So, does it deserve its place? Let's find out. If you don't know the story to this one, it's about Usagi Tsukino, probably the dumbest girl alive. She is a complete and total airhead and a crybaby, but one day she meets this talking cat who tells her that she's actually Sailor Moon, a protector of Earth. Now she's tasked with finding the other sailors so they can join together and defeat the Dark Kingdom before they can resurrect their leader. She also gets some help from Tuxedo Mask, who looks suspiciously like that annoying guy she knows in real life. Look, I'm gonna be real with you guys. Seriously, look me in the eyes. Sailor Moon does not have a good story, at least not the first season. The villains are about as cookie cutter as they come, most of the show is spent hunting different MacGuffins. It's not a very interesting story. I read the entire Sailor Moon manga and honestly didn't care for it because it's mostly just the story. Granted, this series was hugely influential on the genre, so a lot of these sort of elements probably started here. But still, nowadays, it's kinda lame. So, what does the show do so well that I can ignore a lame story and still put it in my top 10? I mean, where do you want me to begin? The main characters are so fun. Usagi can be a little annoying at first, but she gets better. She's a fun protagonist. Plus, she's voiced by my favorite voice actress, Kotono Mitsuishi, who you also know as Misato from Evangelion, Boa Hancock from One Piece, Peko from Danganronpa 2, Juri from Utena, Excel from Excel Saga. She's done a ton of stuff. Even though this is her breakthrough role, she's really giving it her all. Usagi would not be the same character without Mitsuishi's killer performance. Then there's Ami, or Sailor Mercury, who I think is really sweet and likable. You got Makoto, or Sailor Jupiter, who's really funny and cool at the same time. Minako, or Sailor Venus, doesn't really get a lot of time to shine in this season, but trust me, she's really good too. And then we've got Rei, or Sailor Mars. Rei is a perfect character. She's been in my top 5 anime characters ever since I watched the show. I adore her and her silly rivalry with Usagi. I even have this art book exclusively dedicated to Rei. She's perfect, but all the other sailors are extremely likable. And as lame as the main villains are, I really do like the Monster of the Week designs in this. They get better as the show goes on, but there's still some fun ones in this season. I mean, hell, these are really the reason to watch the show. Like I said, the plot sucks. These filler episodes are a lot more enjoyable, even if the first few kinda push lessons a bit too hard. I mean, the original American dub ended with PSAs based off of the messages of each episode, so yeah, it's a little on the nose at times, but still, better than sitting through what is by far the worst part of this season, the Naru and Nephrite arc. This is not a terribly long arc, but it's still quite bad. But you know another thing that helps save this show? The style. I know a lot of it has been appropriated by aesthetic blogs and Twitter accounts where they'll make blingy gifs or add fake subtitles with the girls talking about socialism or something. And again, it's something that later seasons will do better, but I mean, the show just holds up so well, visually speaking. I love the colors, the outfits, the silly faces they make. and the music, which is absolutely killer, even though there are some songs they play a few too many times. Yeah, as you're probably aware, each episode uses the same transformation sequence, as well as other sequences, like Usagi giving her speech to the villain or doing Moon Tiara action. Do these get old after 46 episodes? Yeah, a bit, but they're still really cool and they still get me hyped. And they are some of the more well-animated parts of each episode. The animation in Season 1 is charming, but far from the best in the series. You're not going to be seeing a lot of Sakuga from the first season being shared around on Twitter, let's just say that. So if the show has a bad plot and is mainly carried by the characters and style, both of which are done much better in later seasons, why do I still love this season so much? Is it because of nostalgia? Yes, almost certainly. It's the start of a 200 episode journey that I still remember fondly. But I do think this season is still a very strong start to the show. Just look at the finale of this season, an ending that still gets me to this day, even though, like I've been saying, this is not the best plot. It's not a masterpiece, but enough of this show appeals to me specifically, and I'm nostalgic for it, and I think it's just a great stepping off point for things to come. I know it might seem a little high, but I can't help it. I'm giving Sailor Moon an 8 out of 10. I still love this show, and I can't wait to cover the next several seasons. But we got a bit before the next one. The next target may surprise you. It's an adaptation of the best-selling shoujo manga of all time. Now, what do you think the best-selling shoujo manga ever is? Sailor Moon? Fruits Basket? The Rose of Versailles? Nana? Those are the first ones that come to my mind, but apparently I'm an idiot, because it's Hana Yori Dango, or Boys Over Flowers. This series not only outsold all of those, but has also outsold other non-shoujo series, including Gintama, Inuyasha, and fucking Berserk. It only very recently got passed by My Hero Academia and Jujutsu Kaisen, and even then it's only by a couple million volumes. So yeah, apparently this series is a huge fucking deal over in Japan. Or maybe just somewhere else, I don't know. Definitely not here. I've never really met anyone who's read this, never seen it in the bookstore, and I have certainly never seen anyone really talk about the anime. Interestingly, this anime adaptation aired from 1996 to 97, but the manga ran from 1992 to 2008. So yeah, this is an incomplete adaptation. Normally I would not watch an incomplete adaptation unless it was the only option, but somehow, despite being the best-selling shoujo series, supposedly, this is the only option. This series has like 9 different live-action adaptations, but this is the only anime adaptation it ever got. Maybe the success of the Fruits Basket remake will spawn other, more complete adaptations for some of these other shoujo classics, but as of right now, this is what we're stuck with. So this show is about Tsukushi Makino, who goes to this super nice private school and just wants to have a normal, quiet high school experience. That's made a bit harder by this notorious group known as the F4, comprised of the 4 most rich and popular guys in the school. They basically run the place, and anyone who even mildly annoys them will end up finding a red card in their locker, a declaration of war. When this happens, essentially the entire school turns against that person, and they inevitably transfer out. Tsukushi's friend ends up being the next target of the F4, but Tsukushi fights back, so instead, she gets the declaration of war. However, unlike previous targets, Tsukushi is not going down without a fight, making her a very intriguing opponent for the F4. So looking at this poster, you would probably expect this to be a reverse harem, where all 4 of these guys end up falling for her and she has to pick one. But that's really not the case at all. These 2 guys in the back barely ever talk to her and aren't even labeled as main characters on Mal. They kind of just don't give a shit about her and really don't have any reason to be in the show. In fact, yeah, pretty much only one member of the F4 is in charge of the bullying, and that's this ugly MF, Tsukasa. It's a love triangle, but it's a really uninteresting love triangle. Tsukushi is falling for this guy in the F4, Rui, for basically no reason aside from the fact that he's hot and isn't really that mean to her, but like, he already has a girlfriend, kinda, And meanwhile, Tsukasa is starting to fall for Tsukushi because she's the first girl to really stand up to him, and also she reminds him of his sister? So that's kind of weird. Yeah, it's basically just people falling in love with each other when they have no reason to. But gee, I wonder which one's gonna win. The one who she likes for basically no reason except that he's hot, even though he doesn't really care much about her existence, or the one that she starts off hating, but maybe she'll slowly warm up to him and bring out the good in him. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Besides that, this show is very by the numbers. The characters are really boring, and it hits a lot of predictable tropes and story beats. But hey, considering this is the best-selling shoujo series ever made, I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt and say that a lot of these tropes and story elements that have shown up in tons of shoujo series after it were probably popularized by this series. I'm sure it's more influential than I realized because, again, it just never really took off in America, at least as far as I can tell. But there are a few tropes in this show that I really wish it didn't rely so heavily on. First off, the bullying. There are multiple episodes of this show that are pretty much just 18 minutes of the main character getting tortured, and then she gets some really lame and unsatisfying revenge in like the last 2 minutes. If we're lucky. Sometimes the episode is literally nothing but her suffering. But yeah, the revenge is usually not really worth the build-up, and it's just not very entertaining to watch. Oftentimes, not just in this show, but like a lot of shoujo series, it feels like a cheap way to create conflict and just force you to feel bad for the main character. And hey, for the target audience, usually bullying is a pretty serious problem that they most likely deal with in real life. I'm just saying some of these series rely a little too much on it for drama and conflict, and it just gets really old watching these characters suffer for an entire episode in the most petty ways possible. But that's far from the worst trope this show plays into. We gotta talk about how poorly this show handles sexual assault. Now, if you don't want to watch this part, just skip here. But yeah, boy, this show has a lot of rape in it. Like, a lot. It's another thing that's unfortunately very common in shoujo series. A lot of them use attempted rape or some other form of sexual harassment as an even cheaper way to stir up conflict, or even just for straight up shock value sometimes. It's really annoying and almost never handled well or justified. And Hana Yori Dango is quite bad about it. Like in the first episode, let's look at how she gets bullied. She gets eggs thrown at her, okay, whatever. They throw her desk out, that's pretty weird but kinda tame. And then she almost gets gang raped on the way home. And they specifically mention that it was Tsukasa who sent them, and it's just their way of convincing her to leave the school, which implies that this is probably not the first time Tsukasa has sent guys to rape female students. Main love interest, by the way. You're supposed to want to see this guy improve and change his ways, but they just make him too unlikable at the start. It's the same issue I have with the silent voice. Like, I don't want to see this guy try and change, I just want him to fuck off. He's a piece of shit. For further proof, let's look at this later episode where he gets jealous that she's talking to Rui, so this time he just tries to directly rape her himself in a much more graphic scene. She's pretty understandably traumatized by this one, to the point that in episode 12, her and Tsukasa get stuck in an elevator, another classic trope, and it looks like he's about to try and rape her again. She starts screaming and hitting him and begging for him to get off of her, but oh, he just had a fever and was about to pass out. Hee hee. This scene pissed me off. The initial attack was already really unjustified and was obviously just a cheap way to create some drama between these characters, but now you're going to use the main girl's trauma from that as a way to set up stupid fake outs and jokes? Fuck that. I stopped watching Kaleido Star because it just did something really stupid and I wasn't enjoying the show much anyway, but this show actually offended me. This is so shitty on multiple different levels. So I hate to say it, but I also dropped this show on this episode. I just don't want to see any more of this. I don't want to see this girl get together with this guy. I don't want to see him try and get better. I don't want to see them make light of her almost getting raped twice anymore. And I certainly don't want to see the other attempted rapes that I know are at least in the manga. I'm not sure if the show adapts them, but yes, it happens more than this, apparently. If this stupid, vanilla-ass, mediocre series is the reason why so many other shoujo series rely on sexual assault for conflict, then fuck this series and fuck Yoko Kamio for writing it. Thank you for actively damaging a significant portion of the medium. I can't believe this is the best-selling shoujo series ever. We gotta do better than this one. But now I had a problem. I was 4 entries into the shoujo hit list, and so far, I finished a show that I had already watched and knew I liked, and a show that was a spiritual successor to a show I liked and was very out of the ordinary. The other 2 shows I had not seen before were much more standard, and I dropped them. Not looking good for the rest of the list at this pace. So I decided, no matter what the next show throws at me, no matter how bad it got, I was gonna see this one through to the end. Normally I don't force myself to finish something if I'm not enjoying it, but come on, this is just pathetic. I let 2 of my targets get away. I wasn't gonna let that happen again. So the next show I watched was Full Moon Osagashite, or Searching for the Full Moon. This one's considered a classic, and it has a pretty decent score, so I had high hopes for this one. I was also quite interested in the premise. It's about this young girl named Mitsuki Koyama who likes this boy Eiichi, but before she can admit her feelings to him, he moves to America. She has no way of contacting him, somehow, so she promises him she will pursue her dream of becoming a popular singer so that her music will reach him and they can reconnect in the future. Aw. Only one problem, it's been 2 years since she made that promise, and now she has throat cancer, which has hampered her singing dream, along with the fact that she lives with her grandma who absolutely hates music. Grrr. Her grandma wants her to have surgery, but Mitsuki refuses because there's a chance she'll lose her voice. Suddenly, Mitsuki is visited by 2 Shinigami, Takuto and Meruko, who basically are going to take her soul when she dies, but they kinda showed up early. In fact, Mitsuki has exactly 1 year left to live, according to them. So in order to make sure Mitsuki is happy and ready when it's time for her to pass on, the 2 Shinigami offer their powers to help Mitsuki pursue her dream, transforming her from a timid 12-year-old to a 16-year-old pop idol going by the stage name Full Moon. So yeah, it's basically the same premise as Creamy Mami, except she's dying of throat cancer. I know it's a super cheap tactic, but having a ticking time bomb like a specific date when a character will die really does get me hooked. Like in Mahoramatic, that was not a very good show, but I kept watching because every episode ends with this grim reminder of how many days the main character has until she stops functioning. Same thing here. This is a pretty hard corner to write yourself out of, and I wanted to see how they would handle it. I knew they would probably just pull some bullshit, but who knows, maybe this will be the series that has the guts to actually go through with it. But was this the only thing keeping me going through this show? Well, yeah, honestly. Okay, let's buckle down on the first major issue with this show, and it's one of the biggest ones. It's Mitsuki's voice. Now, I pretty much always watch my animes subbed. There are very few shows where I prefer the dub. Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, Cowboy Bebop, Space Dandy, Panty & Stocking, Bobobo. That's probably it. Oh, and Speed Racer, if that counts. Point is, I try to avoid dubs. But I came really close to watching the dub for this one just because of Mitsuki's voice. I want you to imagine what a 12-year-old anime girl should sound like. Just think about it in your head. What would that sound like? You got it? Okay, compare what you came up with to what Mitsuki actually sounds like in the show.
私死んじゃうとかよりも歌えなくなるのがすごく怖いです。
My god, she doesn't sound 12. Why, she sounds 33. And that's because her voice actress was 33 at the time. Mitsuki is voiced by Maiko, who is much more well known as a singer than a voice actress. In fact, Mitsuki is one of her 2 voice acting roles that she's even credited with, and a lot of comments on her Mal page are people talking about how bad she is. It's monumentally distracting. I thought I'd get used to it, and I kinda did, but it's still just terrible. One of the worst voice acting jobs I've ever heard in an anime. It's not even that she's too old for the role. Adults play kids in animation all the time. It's the fact that she's just using her normal voice and can't act. Her performance is bland and lifeless. It just sucks out any energy this character could have had. I've heard complaints that this character is a Mary Sue, and I think this performance is a big factor as to why people think that. Her voice at least works a little better when Mitsuki is in her full moon form, because at least there she's 16, but it's still not a good performance. Maiko was clearly hired just for her singing, and if I'm being totally frank, I'm not exactly crazy about her singing voice either. And again, it just doesn't fit this character at all. They could have easily hired two people, one to do the voice acting and one to do the singing. That's not an uncommon practice. So aside from having one of the most mismatched voice actresses in anime history on the main character, what else bothered me about this show? Well, honestly, most of the show is just boring. We get the typical showbiz audition stuff. We get this absolutely ridiculous episode where Mitsuki is trying to convince her doctor, who has become her guardian, and this record executive that her and Full Moon are different people, and she goes through this sitcom-ass process of switching back and forth between them like goddamn Mrs. Doubtfire. This was so dumb. Thankfully, they dropped this pretty early. She comes clean, which is nice because this was already getting old during that one episode. There's also an episode where Mariko shapeshifts into Eiichi to help motivate Mitsuki, which was honestly really weird and a little, morally gray. But yeah, once she gets going in showbiz, most of the show is basically just boring wish fulfillment for little girls. Which, hey, that's the target audience here, and I'm sure plenty of young girls who dreamed about being singers absolutely loved this show. And if the show convinced some girls to get into music, then that's always a good thing in my book. But I really couldn't get into this stuff. I've mentioned in the past that idol anime is my fucking kryptonite. I can't stand this shit. And while this isn't particularly an idol show, it's close enough. All this showbiz filler stuff just really started to wear on me after a while. At least I'm pretty sure it's filler. The show is 52 episodes compared to the manga's 35 chapters, and the manga ended 1 year after the show did, so clearly a lot of this shit is made up. Not that filler is always a bad thing, like I said, the filler's the best part of Sailor Moon, but they didn't really have a lot of interesting ideas for this one. And when I say wish fulfillment, I really mean it. I thought Kaleido Star had low stakes, but holy shit, Mitsuki just gets everything handed to her. She's instantly successful and beloved, and very rarely faces major obstacles, aside from the whole dying in a year thing. That's what really makes this so boring to watch. But is there any other draw to these episodes? Well, there is a love triangle. Mariko loves Takato, but clearly him and Mitsuki are starting to develop feelings for each other, which makes her jealous. It's a bit more of an interesting angle to take, but it is still a love triangle, so it is a bit tedious. So yeah, that's basically how the show goes up until episode 38. This is when the plot really starts to pick back up. I'm going to be going pretty in-depth from here on out, so, here's your spoiler warning. So Mitsuki is finally getting a chance to go to America, not just to see Eiichi, but also to visit a doctor who could cure her cancer while still retaining her voice. And yet, her grandma still refuses to let her go. We get some stupid, tragic backstory about why her grandma hates music so much, but even with that, Mitsuki decides fuck it, she's going to America anyway. Probably the first interesting decision she's made in the entire show. So she's in America now. She goofs around for a few episodes and then goes to Eiichi's home where she finds out he's actually been dead for a while. He died only a couple of months after moving to America. Obviously, Mitsuki's world is shattered from this. Her dream was all for nothing, and now she wants to just give up entirely. I love this shot of her lying on his grave, letting the snow cover her. Another review said it's almost like she's trying to be buried with him. It's easily the strongest emotional moment of the show. So this evil Shinigami who's been in the show for a bit, but hasn't really been that interesting, tries to get Mitsuki to kill herself so he can take her soul, and then we get this ridiculous scene where her grandma saves her, but then she almost falls because of a light breeze. It's absurd. I could not take this scene seriously. So now Mitsuki decides to hold one big concert on her last day, and then quickly get the surgery afterwards so she can live. Fine. But shit really starts to get kind of insane when we dive into Takato's story. He starts to remember his human life, where he was in a band with Mitsuki's dad and her doctor. Wow, crazy, dude. He also ended up getting the exact same type of throat cancer that she had, and he ended up killing himself. But, since he remembered his human past, that means he's going to turn into a ghost now and lose all of his powers. So they have to go into the spirit world on a lunar eclipse to get the Flower of Forgetfulness so that he can forget his human memories, but it will also make him forget his memories as a Shinigami, including his time with Mitsuki. Like, what the fuck is happening? So he's fine now, but he still isn't strong enough to transform Mitsuki for the concert, so Mariko and the evil Shinigami, who just isn't really evil anymore, they decide to help out. The concert goes great, but Mariko and Takato are still in trouble. They're going to be punished by the Death Master, and Mitsuki will still die. So Mariko decides she'll sacrifice herself and turn into a ghost so that Mitsuki can live and Takato can get another chance. Due to her kind actions, she gets to be an angel instead of a ghost. Ooh, so basically she dies, but in a prettier way. Mitsuki gets her surgery and lives, and Takato is revived as a human, and he gets to meet with Mitsuki and live happily ever after. So let me get this straight. Basically, the best character in the show decided to let herself die and get cucked, and Takato gets with a girl who he once knew when she was a baby. Mariko spent the whole show being jealous about Takato and Mitsuki's relationship, and she barely showed any signs of changing that stance by the end. This came completely out of nowhere. It just felt super random. So yeah, this ending sort of went completely off the rails and rubbed me in several wrong ways. I really did not find this satisfying at all. A lot of the conflicts just sort of fizzled out instead of really being conclusive. They throw this weird RPG quest in the middle of it. There's a shit ton of coincidences and fated destinies and shit. It's a fucking mess. And it's a shame, because this really is like the only part of the show that's really plot driven. And the plot sucks. So yeah, overall this was mostly a very boring show that ended up completely going bonkers at the end in the worst ways possible, and it just kinda left me feeling empty and frustrated, like I had wasted 52 episodes worth of my own time, which I guess I did. So yeah, this show does not really earn its classic status for me, personally. 3 out of 10. If I hadn't forced myself to finish it, I probably wouldn't have. Alright, enough distractions. Back to the list. After the shit I've been watching, the next one better be interesting. Alright, yeah, sure. Sabage-bu is a very unique entry on the Shoujo hit list. This is one of those school club comedies. I'm not entirely sure what series started the genre, but K-On! Is almost certainly the one that made it explode in popularity. This shit dominated the comedy genre throughout the 2010s, and even to this day we've got these shows. Shows where a bunch of cute girls of varying shallow personalities join some super specific club at their school, and the show basically devolves into a half lecture on that club's activities, or just not having the girls do the activity much at all. For that former type of show, you've got Yori Camp teaching you how to camp, while for the latter you have something like K-On! Or Yu Yushiki, where the club is more so just an excuse for the girls to hang out. Honestly, as formulaic and oversaturated as these shows can be, I do like a good handful of them quite a bit, but they need to be carried by a strong cast, great humor, and maybe just a little something extra. K-On! Has really good music when they actually get around to playing it, Yuru Camp is a super chill Iyashike series on the side, etc. So then you have something like Sabage-bu, where they decide to stand out by being extremely over the top. The show is about an airsoft gun club, where they have these shootouts, which they imagine as being super violent, high-stakes battles, like they're really going to war, and we see the fights through their imaginations in all their bloody glory. It's pretty funny. The first couple times, but it gets old and then it just kind of stops happening after a certain point. And when you strip that away from the show, you really start to notice the flaws. This has happened to other school club comedies like Tajina Senpai and Asabi Asabase, both shows that decided to go the over-the-top route, but wear out their jokes pretty quickly and end up being just mediocre by the end. One of the main factors that holds Sabage-bu back from being truly great is the main cast. There's some good characters here. I really like the main character and how she's kind of just a selfish, narcissistic asshole, but they don't push it too far to make her flat out unlikable. I also really like the president of the Survival Games Club. She's really cool. Everyone else in the club is pretty lame though. The blue hair girl is really into cosplay and that's pretty much her entire character. This girl has huge boobs and is a gravure model, so she just gets a bunch of boob jokes and that's her entire character. And then there's the twin tail girl. Twin tail girls in CGDCT shows are real 50-50 deals. They're either going to be the best character or the worst. And suffice to say, this one is the worst. She spends basically the entire show being the main girl's sub, always wanting to get beaten and humiliated by her. It's kind of like Toko's relationship with Byakuya in the first Danganronpa, except way more frequent and way less funny. And yeah, that's really the main problem with the show. These characters aren't really funny or interesting enough to carry the show outside of that main gimmick. So when that gimmick vanishes, we get a bunch of boob jokes or step on me mistress jokes and just really lame shit like that. This was directed by the same guy who directed Umaru-chan and Gabriel Dropout and Yori, none of which seem to have really had the staying power of other CGDCT comedies of the era. Maybe Yori, but that's just because that has like 20 seasons. Yeah, I don't know, fun concept, but I don't think I'm really a fan of this guy's style, and I don't think the show is funny enough to drop its one trick. Also, wait, how is this shoujo? I know I said at the beginning this is one of the ones that crosses over with other genres, but like, nothing in this show feels like a shoujo series. Like, yeah, the manga was published in a shoujo magazine, but is that really it? There really wasn't anything more targeted towards girls in this show than any other school club comedy. If anything, this felt more targeted towards boys half the time. Call me crazy, but I'm starting to think the Yori guy doesn't know what girls like. But yeah, this was an interesting change of pace on the list, but it really wasn't anything too special. It did have some really funny moments, mostly the shootouts. I mean, I liked it enough to get the DVD for like $3, so I'm gonna give it like a 6 out of 10. Next up on the list is an absolutely massive shoujo series. One of the real hard hitters. Like when I think shoujo, it's one of the first ones that comes to mind. I thought it sold more than Hana Yori Dango, but apparently not. It's Fruits Basket. Specifically the remake that started in 2019. This is the only other thing on the list besides Sailor Moon that's multiple seasons, so again, I'll be spreading this one out. But seriously, people have gone nuts over the remake. Absolutely nuts. The final season was in the top 10 highest rated anime of all time on MAL, but it's been knocked out by a bunch of shows that started airing this fall, because of course it did. I really fucking hate how MAL handles this section. It's just absolutely flooded with brand new shit and sequels. Like half of the top 50 is just different entries for Gintama, Attack on Titan, and Monogatari. And this shit isn't weighted either. Like Kaguya Season 3 was beating Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood for a bit, even though it has a fraction of the amount of ratings. And if you're thinking, oh well, AniList is better than MAL anyway, yeah, on that site, Fruits Basket The Final is the second highest rated anime of all time, losing only to the final fucking Gintama movie. Okay, sorry, I got a little sidetracked there, let's just take it easy for a sec. The point is, the Fruits Basket remake was a massive hit, and a lot of people think it's going to start a shoujo anime revival, since we haven't really gotten many lately. But does it live up to the hype? Let's dig into all these fruits. So this series is about Toru Honda, who lost her father when she was young, and more recently lost her mother. Not wanting to be a burden on her grandfather, she decides to simply just live in a tent in the woods on her own. That all changes when the mysterious Soma family decides to take her in. At first, Toru thinks this is awesome, because she gets to live with the prince of the school, Yuki, as well as his cousins Shigure and Kyo. In fact, she gets to meet a large number of Soma family members because it's an extremely large family. And a lot of them are really not related at all, so the fact that there's a bunch of couples in the family, yeah, don't worry too much about that. But anyway, Toru soon learns that many of the members of the Soma family have a curse. When they're hugged by someone of the opposite gender, they turn into an animal from the Chinese zodiac. And then they turn human again after a random amount of time, and of course they're naked, you get the idea. But while we get some fun Ranma antics from the transformations, Toru is more interested in helping the family with this curse and all of their individual problems. Her shining optimism in the face of overwhelming odds is a much needed ray of hope for the Soma family, with all of the members warming up to her and trusting her, except for one, but we'll get to them later. So the main series that Fruits Basket really reminds me of, just on a surface level, is Monogatari. Yes, Fruits Basket is like a decade older, but just for the sake of comparison, that show is about a dude who helps a bunch of girls who all have supernatural problems tied to animal spirits. But that show is very abstract with its concepts, like a girl losing her weight because of a crab spirit, or a girl being perpetually lost because of a snail. And it's also very horny, it's basically a harem. Fruits Basket is a little more simple. I mean, aside from literally turning into their animals, the characters' personalities reflect their respective animal curses. Yuki, the rat, is very timid and is the arch-rival of Kyo, the cat, so they're always fighting. Kagura is the boar, and she's very aggressive and standoffish, but still kinda cute. You get the idea. And their problems are a lot less supernatural. Again, besides the transformations, it's more so about their personal lives and the damage that their curse has done. They're social outcasts, many of whom have strained or distant relationships with their immediate family because of the curse. Others struggle with the family's traditions involving the zodiac, particularly the annual zodiac banquet they have, where the cat is traditionally not invited. Kyo does have it the worst being the cat, mostly because of this old fairy tale they tell at the beginning of the show. Basically, the cat is just seen as a fucking asshole. That's all you really need to know. So he gets the worst treatment, and his suffering within the family is a core part of the show's emotional narrative. But good old Toru, she's just so sweet and adorable and helpful and caring. Watching her use gentle compassion and pure love to help these strangers overcome their own personal hurdles is the real driving force of the show. Sure, there's the mystery of the family and the curse, and later on we'll get into more plot-related stuff, but for the most part, Season 1 is just Toru meeting the family and helping them out. And I really loved it. The show balances genuinely funny and ridiculous comedy with some very touching emotional moments. I don't know if I'd go far enough to say you'll laugh and cry, but you'll definitely be feeling a lot of emotions, at the very least. And for such a large cast, there's very few characters who I dislike. They're all written very well, and have far more nuanced personalities than the animal gimmick might lead you to believe. Like when I was talking about them earlier, those were some real generalizations. Most of these characters have a little more going on than that. That said, there are a couple of characters I don't care for, and they're introduced in back-to-back episodes. Nice! First is Ritsu, the monkey. This character is debatably a trans girl. It's not really made clear. They kind of write them off as a cross-dresser, especially since being hugged by girls still makes them transform. But I don't know, the way they talk about themselves makes it seem a little deeper than that. I don't know, I'm just going to use she/her for this character for simplicity's sake. As you'll see later, you can't really trust this show when it comes to LGBT representation. It is a bit dated in that regard. But yeah, this character's entire personality is that she feels completely worthless in the world, constantly apologizes, and threatens to kill herself. Pretty funny stuff. She's just way more of a one-note, over-the-top joke character than everyone else, but it's like, we really didn't need a full-on comic relief character. Everyone in this show has their silly moments. It's not always dramatic. And also, she's just extremely unfunny. This episode is just a lot of screaming and weird off-color suicide jokes. And then Shigure's editor shows up, and her whole character is being super anxious and also threatening to kill herself. This is like one of the most unbearable episodes of any anime I've ever seen. I hated it. It's a shame that the closest thing this show has to a trans rep is just used as a shitty joke, and is often written off as just not even being trans. And then right after that, we get to meet Hiro, the sheep. He's just kind of a bratty little shithead kid who's kind of just mean to be mean. I don't know, both of these episodes just felt a bit out of place in the show. Hiro gets better though, and Ritsu is like basically not in the show again after that, aside from like one brief appearance later. But yeah, I still would not say I'm really a fan of these characters. But the rest of the cast is super solid, and right after these two stinkers, we get my two favorite episodes in the show, focusing on my favorite character, Saki. She's one of Toru's two best friends. The other is a former delinquent girl, while Saki is this mysterious goth girl who claims to have psychic powers that she can kill people with. The first of these two episodes is pretty much just a joke episode that really reminds me of the Utena episode where Nanami tries to put snails in Anthony's pencil box. Really fun episode, but then it's followed up by a much more serious episode about Saki's seriously tragic childhood and how she came to know and love Toru. It's probably my favorite emotional moment in the entire show. The last thing I want to bring up is the big twist at the end of this season. I won't spoil it, but I had pretty mixed feelings on it. Basically, it revolves around a design that is supposed to be really scary and intimidating, but I thought it was kinda goofy. And it was also just a really out of left field concept that didn't really fit with the rest of the show. But hey, we got 2 seasons left. I'm sure they'll elaborate on it more in the future, but yeah, a bit of a weird note to end on. But overall, I really enjoyed this season, besides those 2 not very good episodes. It had a great balance of comedy and emotion, a strong ensemble cast, and some real promise for the future. I'm gonna slap an 8 out of 10 on Fruits Basket Season 1. Let's hope the rest of the series lives up to the hype. Alright, next up is the next Sailor Moon season, Sailor Moon R. I'm not going to talk too much about this one because honestly, it really is just kind of more of the first season, but better. Well, not at first. The first 13 episodes of this season make up a pretty infamous filler arc, widely considered to be one of the weakest parts of the entire series. And yeah, it is pretty bad. Again, not trying to spoil the ending of the first season too much, but essentially, the girls need to be reintroduced to each other, and that's really all this arc is doing. There are these really lame alien villains, tuxedo mask dresses like this now. The whole thing is a fucking fever dream and is honestly pretty tough to get through. But after that arc, Junichi Sato leaves his position as director, and in his place comes my man Ikuhara, and this is when the show really starts to get good. We meet Chibiusa, who is a very polarizing character. It seems like most people really only love or hate her. I'm fine with her, she's not one of my favorites, but I don't think she ruins the show. There have been far worse baby or toddler characters thrown into shows. I'm just glad she actually contributes to the plot instead of just being a cheap mascot. But yeah, I mean, the animation looks a little better, the comedy is a bit funnier, the action is a little more intense and less repetitive, and I think the main plot is better than the first season's, or at the very least, it's more interesting. First season's plot is very simple. Like I said, pretty much everything is just a little better this time around. If it wasn't for that first arc, I would probably give this a 9 out of 10, but yeah, those first 13 episodes are pretty rough, so I'm gonna go ahead and give this the same score I gave Season 1, an 8 out of 10. And real quick, I did watch the Sailor Moon R movie, which was fucking awesome. Absolutely gorgeous film with a real simple plot that basically just serves as an excuse for some of the most spectacular action in the series. This film is just total eye candy and is just dripping with Ikuhara's style. And it's pretty damn funny too. I absolutely loved it. I'm throwing a 9 out of 10 on this movie, and now I'm kind of tempted to just go rewatch it again, but we have more business to attend to. The next entry on the list is a very interesting one. Or maybe you won't think it's interesting because it's a show you've never heard of. This is easily the most obscure thing on the list. Only about 4,000-ish people on Mal have even logged this show, and half of those people are just planning to watch it. Over on AniList, only 300-some people have watched this show in some capacity, with only 200 completing it. So yeah, this is a pretty deep shoujo cut. It's a little show called Mizuiro Jidai. Now the question is, how did I find this show? I mean, I've never heard anybody on Earth talk about it. It certainly never came out here. What's going on? Well, you see, there was this bot on Twitter that is unfortunately now defunct that used to just post random openings and endings from old anime shows. It was really cool getting to see some really sick songs from shows that you probably hadn't heard of. And sure enough, I liked the second ending of Mizuiro Jidai so much that I decided, what the hell, let's give the show a shot. Warning, this is a really bad way of discovering shows. Don't watch a show just because you like the opening or ending. I watched Orgus just because the opening is awesome, and that shit was terrible. But whatever, I wanted to take a chance and just watch something really obscure for the list. And I'll have you know, the only reason this was so high on the list was because I wanted to spread out some of the things that I thought would be really good. I didn't want to front load the list with good stuff, which thankfully didn't happen, as you've seen. But yeah, my expectations going into this one were very low. I mean, it's a show that nobody's ever heard of. It barely has over a 7 on Mal, which is not great for an older show. And the description mentions something about a love triangle, which the poster also seems to illustrate. Yeah, did not have high hopes. But was this show a pleasant surprise? Let's take a look. The show follows a young girl named Yuko Kawai, who is a shy but friendly student in junior high. She started to develop romantic feelings for her childhood friend / next door neighbor Hiroshi. Unfortunately, Yuko's best friend Takako also has feelings for him. As you can imagine, this leads to all sorts of crazy misunderstandings and antics and drama and...
仕方ないよ。ひろしくんが誰が好きかなんて、ゆうちゃんのせいじゃないもん。
Wait, what?
もう待たなくていいよ。
え、それってどういう。
こういうこと。
Okay, so that didn't last. Yeah, the whole love triangle thing, which is the only thing in the description on Mal, is only in the show for like 3 episodes. It does not really take long for Takako to realize, like, oh shit, yeah, he likes Yuko, so I should probably just let them be. And by the end of episode 3, him and Yuko are basically together. Well, okay, that's fine by me. I did not really want to watch a 47-episode love triangle show, so things are looking up. But yeah, what's the plan for the rest of these episodes, then? Well, Mizuiro Jidai is basically just a slice-of-life show that balances fun comedy with some relatable drama for the target audience. And trust me, there are episodes that really just don't apply to anyone who isn't a middle school girl. There's stuff about getting along with your siblings and not procrastinating on homework, but then there's also some more sensitive topics that I thought the show handled really well. For example, there's an episode about Yuko getting her first period, and it's a very frank and informative, but still respectful portrayal of the topic. It's something that all girls need to know, and the show doesn't really talk down to them. I was pretty impressed by this one. But there are times where the show does kind of talk down. They really hammer the message in sometimes, often feeling like a very special episode of an old sitcom. Like there's a fad diet episode, which basically boils down to Yuko starving herself, which I feel like every family sitcom in the 90s had an episode where this happens. And I mean, these episodes are still done decently enough in this show. They just really lay into the message sometimes. Another issue I have with the show is the soundtrack. Almost every song in this show is just an instrumental reworking of the opening. This gets old really fast. I love when shows incorporate the opening into the soundtrack. I love me a good leitmotif, but this is overkill. especially with the repetitive and simple nature of this melody. Yuko herself can also be a little annoying. There are multiple episodes where she basically just lies to her friends because she's afraid of hurting their feelings with the truth, only for them to get way more upset because she lied. Like, they even say at one point, bro, you've done this before and we got mad, why are you doing it again? Maybe this is why the show hammers the lesson in. Yuko clearly needs it. Probably her most frustrating moment comes during the climax of the show. I'm not going to put a spoiler warning here because, one, I'm not going to spoil how the climax resolves. I'm just going to lay out the premise. And two, of all the shows on this list, this is the one that I think people will be the least likely to go check out, so I don't think anyone will care about a mild spoiler. Basically, Yuko's friends are kind of pressuring her into having sex with her boyfriend, which Yuko doesn't really feel ready for. Again, a bit more of a sensitive topic that I think this show handles pretty well. But then when Yuko asks Hiroshi if he wants to have sex with her, and she's like hoping he says no, and then he says no, he's also not really ready for that, then she gets mad at him, and they have a fight, and that's what the climax is. They have to try and get through this little fight that they're having. And it's a fight they're having because Yuko is just mad that he feels the same way as her. Yeah, sometimes I kind of sympathize, but other times I do find Yuko to be a little too much of a handful. Thankfully, the rest of the cast is really likable. I love her best friend Takako. She's got some of the best episodes. I particularly like this arc where she really wants to work at a salon when she's older, but then she gets like an internship basically and realizes that the field requires a lot more than she initially thought, so she starts to doubt her abilities and motivation. Yuko also has an episode or two where she has her own self-confidence issues stemming from her performance in the school band, and those are pretty good too, though I will say it is pretty hilarious that she's doubting herself when everyone else in the band sounds like this. I also really like this girl they meet in cram school. There's this girl who's the manager of Hiroshi's soccer team, and she's voiced by a young Maya Sakamoto, and Hiroshi himself ain't half bad either. I also really like Yuko's other friends who get a little more of a spotlight at the end of the show because of a really weird structuring decision. See, due to the show's popularity, I guess the publisher for the manga wanted the author to capitalize on the success by writing some more. So she came up with Shin Mizuiro Jidai. However, I guess she didn't really have an idea for a sequel, so these are mostly just random stories that happen at various points throughout the original series. But then the show decided to adapt these stories too, or at least some of them. So yeah, the show ends in like the late 30s, but then the last 9 or so episodes of the show are just random stories taking place earlier in the show, and then a clip show. It's very weird. I thought I would really get annoyed by this because I do tend to dislike when shows naturally end, but then just kind of keep going. But I didn't really mind here since this isn't really a super plot-driven show anyway, and each of these Shin episodes focus on a different side character, which I thought was fun. You even get to see how some of these stories connect to earlier episodes, which I thought was cool. The clip show does kind of suck, but yeah, the rest of it was a-okay. Overall, I was indeed pleasantly surprised by Mizuiro Jidai. Now, let me be crystal clear, this is not some sort of hidden shoujo gem. It really is just kinda fine. But I don't know, I thought the good parts were really good. And the annoying stuff, while it definitely brought the show down, it wasn't really constant enough for me to really dislike watching the show. Like, it was never hard to get through. And as time passes and I look back on this show, I kinda miss it. Maybe that's just because of how bad a lot of these other shows have been, but yeah, this was solid. Definitely a much better show than I expected. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 7 out of 10. It was a cute and solid watch. Next up is an adaptation of a somewhat more modern shoujo classic. Even though the manga started 20 years ago. You know what I mean. It's Skip Beat. Yeah, this manga has been running for 20 years and still isn't done. But in 2008, it got a 25-episode anime adaptation. So obviously this is not a complete adaptation, but it's all we've got, and it still seems to be pretty well regarded, so I'm watching it. This show is about Kyoko Mogami, who is busting her ass working multiple jobs just to support her childhood friend Sho, who is quickly becoming a popular idol. Despite her hardships, she doesn't really complain because she's just so infatuated with him. But one day she finds out that Sho really doesn't care about her at all, and really is just using her as a servant. Kyoko is so enraged by this that she vows to get her revenge in the most devastating way possible, becoming more famous than him. So she enters the world of showbiz, but things don't go quite as planned at first. Turns out becoming an actress just out of revenge doesn't get you very far. She fails her audition, but is put into a new section called the Love Me section, where she basically just has to do odd jobs for the agency to learn a little more about the love she's lacking. Along the way, she discovers her genuine potential and passion for acting, but she still wants to kick Sho's ass. This was a really fun show. Normally, I'm not too interested in the showbiz stuff, but yeah, this really surprised me. I think Kyoko's revenge plan really does help make this a lot more interesting than it would be otherwise, and funnier too. And it gives her some nice development as the show goes on, where her passion for acting begins overtaking her sheer lust for revenge. I do start to miss the fun revenge angle in the second half of the show, but still, she's a great protagonist. The acting scenes are also pretty exciting, though they are not the best acting scenes that we will be seeing on the Shoujo Hitlist. They were still a welcome change of pace from time to time, though. But aside from the seriously good character development, the show is also just damn funny. There were several episodes where I found myself laughing a lot more than I expected. I think a lot of the comedy really holds up. I'd say the main thing that doesn't hold up with this show is the art style. This show is ugly. Like, really fucking ugly. It's like a weird mix between the charming early 2000s digital jank and, like, shows that actually look good, but taking the worst elements from both. But poor visuals aside, I really don't have too many complaints with this show. I think the main thing that really kind of dampened my enjoyment was just the show losing a little steam in the second half. And I'm not even sure what happened, really. It just kind of started to get a tiny bit stale, or maybe the pacing slowed down ever so slightly. Maybe they reused a joke a few too many times. I'm not entirely sure, but I was not quite feeling the second half of the show as much of the first. I still really liked it, but yeah, I was kind of ready to move on by the end. Oh, and as you could probably guess, the end is really not an end. It really does just kind of end on a, wow, I've met so many people and experienced so much, yet my journey is only beginning, sort of thing. Translation, buy the manga, idiot. Unfortunately, I don't really feel like reading 40 plus volumes of this series, but hey, I enjoyed the show quite a bit. Not one of my absolute favorites on the list, but definitely worth a watch. Solid 7 out of 10 for Skip Beat. But fuck Skip Beat, actually, because next up is some serious business. I was really looking forward to the next entry because this series had already made a strong first impression on me. It was finally time to watch Fruits Basket Season 2. Except actually around this time, my family and I took a trip to Yellowstone for a week, which was awesome, best vacation I've ever been on. But the first thing I did when I got home was start this show, because I was really hyped. However, I wasn't really feeling the first couple episodes of this season. They introduced these student council characters who really don't do a whole lot for the plot yet and kind of just disappear until almost the end of the season. Okay, well, that's kind of a weird note to start on, but whatever. Back to the good stuff. But boy, there's a lot of characters in this show. I kind of forgot. It's a lot to keep track of. Have I forgotten some of this stuff? I mean, I don't know. It's already been a bit since I saw Season 1. Oh, and we're adding new characters too? Okay, well, at least we get a hot goth girl who has a bitchy attitude and huge tits. Oh, now they're going to the beach. Yeah, we're really spending a lot of time at the beach, and now the main villain is here, and... It took me up until about the halfway point of this season to realize something. This season is bad. I didn't like it. And I honestly don't even know where to begin. But before we start, let me just say I am not holding back on spoilers for this season, or Season 1, actually. So skip here if you don't want to get spoiled. I guess we can start with the big issue and then work our way down. Yeah, this is one of the worst villains I've ever seen in a show. And if you ask me, personally, I don't think this show really needed a main villain. There were plenty of conflicts in this show already without having someone this ridiculously and cartoonishly evil in it. Seriously, this is one of the most over-the-top villains I've seen in an anime. And it's fucking anime we're talking about here, so yeah, that's a high bar. This villain, Akito, just does not fit in this show. She's calling herself God, she calls Toru a bitch and scratches her face during one of their first interactions. She's kept members of the family locked up and psychologically tortured them. Like, Jesus Christ, this show just got way darker and the stakes got way higher out of literally nowhere. Well, okay, to be completely fair, they did hint at Akito's existence a bit in the first season, and she even shows up to scare Yuki at school. And yeah, it's a weird scene, but I don't know, I still didn't think she'd be this fucking bad. She is just too evil to take seriously, when the rest of the show is pretty down to earth. Minus the whole Zodiac curse thing, yeah. I just can't put into words how ridiculous this character is. Just like, out of nowhere, she'll start going off on these tirades, like saying Kyo's mother committed suicide because of him. Pretty much unprompted. It's just constant. That's just how she always is. Then there's Akito's plan. Basically, she makes a bet with Kyo saying that if Kyo doesn't beat Yuki before they graduate high school, then Akito is going to lock Kyo up for the rest of his life. Now, you may be wondering, beat Yuki at what exactly? Well, that's a great fucking question. They don't really make it clear. At first I assumed it meant beating Yuki at winning Toru's love. Though I will be honest, I don't really remember if this bet was made before or after they met Toru. I'm kind of thinking they did it before. Doesn't really matter, since Akito just fucking hates Toru and doesn't want the family to get close with her, because, spoilers for the next season, falling in love with an outsider breaks the Zodiac curse. Yes, this ancient 1,000-year-old curse that nobody knows how to break is broken when you fall in love with someone who isn't in your fucking family. How did this curse survive so long, exactly?
Actually, it's broken by forming a stronger bond with an outsider than your bond with God. And also, the curse is just naturally deteriorating anyway.
Yeah, whatever, not important. But yeah, beating Yuki for Toru's love doesn't make sense. Also, by the end of this season, Yuki basically admits that he loves Toru more like a mother rather than romantically, so that's the end of that love triangle. One of those new student council characters is going to be Yuki's love interest now. How fascinating. And don't worry, we'll get to her fucking issues in the next season. But okay, so it's not beating him for Toru's love. So what the fuck is it? Just beating him in a fight? They have a fight like every episode, big whoop. I truly don't know what they mean by this bet. But don't worry, just like a lot of things in this show, it's just gonna get dropped rather than resolved. Much like that thing at the end of season 1. Yeah, that's barely brought up again. It never happens again. Not really sure why it was part of the show. I thought the later seasons would build on it, but they really don't. But Akito is not the only bad character now. Now a bunch of the characters just talk in constant cryptic bullshit, especially Shigure. This is like my least favorite type of mystery writing. You'll have a character whispering into another character's ear, and you don't hear anything, you just see the other character's reaction to what they're hearing. Then another character will be like, "So what did you tell him?" And then the first character will be like, "The truth." And that's the end of the scene, and we don't ever bring it up again for like 20 episodes. I mentioned how Penguindrum is like perfectly paced, where you're getting some information, but things are still kept vague enough to keep you guessing and to intrigue you to keep watching. In this, you don't get anything to work with. The show is just constantly withholding information, so you have no fucking clue what's going on, and you just get a bunch of confusing scenes that, if you're lucky, will make sense later when they decide to just info dump the story. This season's biggest crime is just being fucking boring because of how badly paced this mystery aspect is. Sure, we get character stories that help us see how awful Akito is, but hey, she's still awful in the present, so that's not really helping much. No shit, people are forming factions either against her or with her. She's an abusive and manipulative monster. Some people are brave enough to fight back, others are afraid. Not much of a fucking mystery. And there's just so many characters now, like too many, even. And they're getting less and less interesting. Like every new character now, and I mean pretty much every new character, has the same fucking backstory, involving their parents neglecting them, or abandoning them, or just some sort of parental trauma. Personally, I preferred when different characters had different problems, you know, like real people. It's just not interesting seeing yet another character spend an entire episode recounting why their parents hate them. And it makes this incredibly large, extended cast start to blend together quite a bit. Huge thanks to all of you out there making relationship charts for this series. These have helped a ton when it comes to refreshing my memory on all of this shit. Everything else good about the first season is just stale now, especially the humor. It is way more repetitive and not funny anymore. Like, it's just really generic anime humor now. Loud, obnoxious, usually poorly timed. Toru has been reduced to basically just making one silly face whenever she's reacting to basically anything, and she's just becoming more and more of a boring character. But that's something we'll dive into more in the last season. The last thing I want to talk about here is the big twist at the end of this season. Season 1's twist is that Kyo has this super ugly monster form, and it's a big deal, and it's really scary, and supposedly going to be a game changer. And Season 2's twist is that Akito is a woman. Wait, what? I've been calling her she this whole time, and I bet none of you were questioning it either. Like, yeah, obviously I know she's a woman, I finished the show, but like, from her introduction, I thought she was a woman. Like, she looks feminine, has a female voice actress doing a very feminine voice. I thought she was a woman, besides the name. It wasn't until characters started referring to her with male pronouns that I was like, oh, okay, I guess they are a dude. So, yeah, maybe this works better in the manga when she's not voiced, but yeah, this was not much of a twist to me. Also, I love how Akito is always wearing low-cut kimonos and stuff, and you can see she's very flat, but just for this reveal, they gave her, like, D-cups and made her super curvy. Like, yeah, really gotta show off that she's a woman. Like, where did those come from? I'm not even sure why they made this a twist. It doesn't change anything. She's still awful. Only reason I can think of to suddenly throw this in is because otherwise, if Akito was a dude, then Akito would be gay. This season has a very weird habit of taking characters who seemed queer in the first season and making them not. Like Ayame, Yuki's older brother who's extremely flamboyant and designs women's clothing, which he often wears himself, and makes a bunch of gay jokes all the time, like he's very much just a gay stereotype. Yeah, actually, he's got a girlfriend. Okay, maybe that one's for the best, but how about Toru's best friends, both of whom share such a deep bond and love and sense of protection towards Toru that at times in the first season, it borders on romantic feelings. Nope. They both get male love interests this season. The delinquent girl falls in love with the dude because he did this at the store, by the way. Wow, talk about love at first sight. Also, the reason she loves him for this is because it reminds her of Toru. So yeah, nice bait. Not a lot of fruits in this basket, as it turns out. Overall, this season was a pretty massive disappointment. There were still moments I liked. I think my favorite in this season was when Kyo and Kagura's relationship kind of reached its turning point, but really strong moments like that are much fewer and far between than they were in Season 1. Maybe that final season will pull it back. I mean, it can't just be that highly rated for nothing, right? But yeah, this was a huge step down from Season 1 for me. I'm gonna have to give it like a 4 out of 10. I didn't like it. Next up is Sailor Moon S, the third season. Now, I remember this one being the best season, but holy fuck, I forgot it was this good. Again, much like the last season, I'm not going to talk too much about this, it's still sort of the same formula, but man, everything is better in this one. The humor is extra funny this season, particularly the physical comedy, and that's enhanced by how good the art and animation are now. This season just looks so much better than the first two. All the returning characters are just as fantastic as ever, but I also really like the new characters this season, Sailors Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn. They all bring interesting new dynamics to the story that helps to keep things interesting. Speaking of the story, it's actually good this time. Like, genuinely quite good. So the show's ability to balance serious melodrama with wacky comedy is perfected here. This is easily the most balanced season in that regard. And the whole thing is just drenched in Ikuhara's style. You can tell this season was his baby, and he had much more creative control over it than he did with R. It gets incredibly outlandish and surreal, and I know I keep comparing things to it, but seriously, it is the same sense of humor that Utena has. And of course, the Monster of the Week episodes are still just as creative and fun as ever, if not more so. I don't know, man, what do you want me to say? It's everything I like about Sailor Moon but enhanced, and everything I don't like is improved to the point that I like it. It's the best season, and in my opinion, it's kind of just the perfect magical girl show. So yes, Sailor Moon does still deserve to be in my top 10. I just need to clarify now that it's Sailor Moon S. Perfect 10 out of 10 for this one. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing for the Sailor Moon S movie. This was pretty lame, easily my least favorite of the three movies. For some reason, this movie focuses on Luna, of all characters, and it's just kind of a boring story. It has these really annoying monsters in it that just constantly make this noise. Yeah, I don't know, it was just kind of an annoying and boring movie that lacked a lot of the style and oomph of the season. And that's because Ikuhara didn't direct this. I'm starting to realize just how hard he carries this series sometimes. This movie is skippable. 5 out of 10. Jeez, look at the time. Looks like we're gonna be pulling an all-nighter. What do you say we go across the road and get a few drinks? My treat. We'll pick this back up soon.